this will be the largest free trade area in the world.
We're a country that wants to do better.
If you're an investor in South Africa, you're part of South Africa Incorporated.
And even museums are looking at acquiring artists from the African continent.
Time for Africa is now.
Africa is on the rise. The African continent is on the cusp of transformative growth, with blossoming entrepreneurship and plenty of investment opportunities. South Africa is the second largest economy on the continent, and over the past decade, it has experienced rapid change and is ranked by the World Bank as an upper middle income country. Of the more than 400 companies on the continent earning more than $1 billion annually, about half are in South Africa. The country has a well-developed infrastructure and world-class financial sector to support business activities, and is one of the highest-ranking African countries on the Ease of Doing Business Index. Since the fall of apartheid, South Africa has experienced rapid economic growth, and in recent years, its black middle class has expanded dramatically. Ibrahim Rasool is a South African politician and diplomat who served as the South African ambassador to the United States from 2010 to 2015. He has been the recipient of numerous awards and accolades, including the coveted London Financial Times Award for his role in promoting significant investment in South Africa.
I know that we all feel a bit shy about referring to one country in Africa as a gateway and implies hierarchy, but my sense is we must embrace it. And we must utilize it for the best of Africa. Because for many parts of the world, South Africa is the soft landing into an unknown territory. And I think that what is now added to it is that South Africa has led and is the main signatory to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. What that means is that in a short period of time, there will be no differential tariffs between one African country and another, one region in Africa and another. 1.2 billion people, all connected into a single market, a single export regime, minimal delays, and increasingly with a manufacturing hub and a logistics hub. I think South Africa is redefining its relationship to the rest of Africa, and the world must redefine its relationship with this powerhouse. We've got a new generation of presidents who are emerging in Africa that's far more business-minded, that is no longer just sold on the imperative of the liberation ethic, but the growth and development ethic. And I think that we have a continuity going back to President Obama with his deputy, Joe Biden, and saying, let's get back onto a rational, mutually beneficial relationship between us. Our 5 largest banks in South Africa are the largest banks in Africa. So I think that our monetary policy remains a major source of strength, and very importantly, our financial and judicial institutions are as robust as ever. And therefore, you will know that when you sign a contract in South African jurisdiction, it's justiciable globally, with a recognizable legal framework. And as long as Treasury is there, we know that our money is well spent. But what is happening now is that Fitch has started the uptick. And so we are accepting slow rise in interest rates in order to create the conditions for investment to come in. We are asking you to invest in the human capital of our young people so that they can be a blessing to the whole world, and not just to the African continent, and you kickstart the industrial revolution in Africa. We are saying that we have all the world's minerals that you require to fire up your modern technology, and we will increasingly get rid of the undue restrictions, like we will secure your IP rights, your intellectual property rights. We will make spectrum not only available, but we will make it cheaper the more it comes to scale. I believe that the USA needs new sources of goods, and it needs new destinations of investment. Africa is that virgin territory. You can go to Europe and compete with China and Russia and everyone else, or you could come to Africa and be welcomed and get the return on your investment.
Celebrated Judge L.B. Sachs is a retired South African activist, lawyer, writer, and a former judge appointed by Nelson Mandela to serve on the first Constitutional Court of South Africa. In 1966, he went into exile in England. Later, he moved to Mozambique, where on April 7, 1988, he was the victim of a car bombing executed by the South African Security Services. He lost his right arm and vision in one eye. In 1990, Sachs returned to South Africa to help write the Constitution of South Africa and later to serve for 15 years on the Constitutional Court.
One of the advantages of exile was you live everywhere in the world, and we'd lived all over Africa. I'd lived in Mozambique, and we decided we all belong to this country, and we've got to find a way, and the way has to be the constitutional way. Our constitution constituted us as a people, as a nation. And it took us 5, 6 years. For the first time, we would vote as equals. It was so beautiful, so wonderful. April the 27th, 1994, standing in these long lines. An old man brought in on a wheelbarrow to vote before he died, a black man. I can vote. I'm a human being. My vote counts as much as the vote of F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela and anybody else. Nelson Mandela, who'd been 27 years in jail, 1996, signed the new constitution into law. I speak now not just as a former judge, as a lawyer, believing in constitutions. It's my life. I was in prison. I was blown up. I lost an arm, sight of an eye. I think back to those days. I think back to us as dreamers. 6th of April, 1952. Now it is even formalized, systematized in apartheid. And the planes are flying overhead, it's a public holiday, and the armored cars going through the streets, and maybe 200 of us are in a little hall in Salt River, Cape Town, working class area, and singing. And I'm 17 years old, I'm a second-year law student, and I'm learning the songs in African languages that I don't understand, but I can feel them. And the songs were very sad. My boye, my boye, my boye, Africa, come back Africa. Senzenina, Senzenina, what have we done, what have we done? And suddenly it's Dr. Morocco, Dr. Dadu, J.B. Marks, Katani Lebapapi. Volunteers obey the orders, be ready for the action now. And they're calling for volunteers to defy the unjust apartheid laws. And I say to my friend Wolfie Kodish, who brought me there may be 10 whites, 200 black people in the audience. I want to volunteer. And I tell this story because I was volunteer number 8,942 or something. Volunteer number 1 was a certain Nelson Mandela, a lawyer in the only black legal firm in the country, willing to sacrifice the opportunities to make a bit of money, to be socially important for the struggle of his people. So one of the thorniest issues when the Constitution was being negotiated was property. So the negotiators grappled with the issue, and they worked out a whole program of organized land reform so that ultimately the courts would supervise that process. It wouldn't just be left to government ministers. South Africa has surprised the world in the past. It's overcome what seemed to be insuperable objects and difficulties. South Africa will do so again.
South Africa is the most advanced, diversified, and productive economy in Africa. Boasting one of the most pro-business environments on the continent, it is a logical and attractive option for U.S. companies seeking to enter the sub-Saharan Africa marketplace. The economy in Africa has enjoyed relative macroeconomic stability. The maturity of the South African economy is reflected in the mix of economic sectors. Primary, 10%. Secondary, 21%. Tertiary, 69%. South Africa's urban areas boast well-developed infrastructure, comparable to OECD standards. The banking and financial services sector is stable. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange ranks among the top emerging market exchanges in the world. The country is a member of the World Trade Organization, the G20, and is also economically the most significant ratifier of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The U.S. renewed the African Growth and Opportunity Act Agreement, which provides duty-free access to the U.S. market for most sub-Saharan African countries. Lerato Mataboge is the Deputy Director General for Trade and Investment in the South African Department of Trade, Industry, and Competition. In this role, she provides strategic support and advice to the departmental leadership and the presidency on exports, investments, and engaging global stakeholders for economic growth.
Is we are grappling with this whole notion of industrializing our economies, so that we're not just dependent on, our primary resources of agriculture, primary resources of minerals. We are looking to, add value and innovate and become part of this whole fourth industrial revolution that everybody's speaking of. So our partnerships with, American firms and individuals would really benefit greatly from some of the innovation and the leapfrogging, as it were, that exists in the US. There's a lot of R&D in the US. There's a lot of innovation in the US. So for us to move up this industrial value chain, our partnerships would greatly benefit from some of the innovation that can be brought to bear by US partners. Another area of growth that we are looking at is the whole notion of climate and climate change adaptation. And that brings in a myriad of new ways of doing things, new ways of planning your infrastructure, new ways of, raising resources, new ways of essentially innovating, as it were. And of course, immediately, we are all still, as a world, as a continent, as a country, grappling with a post-COVID world and what that looks like and the opportunities that come out of there. There's a lot of opportunities in the health sector, new vaccines that need to be developed. So one success story in terms of South African-US partnership is a partnership with Johnson & Johnson. They partnered with a South African pharmaceutical company, Aspen, for the production of J&J vaccines for export into the rest of Africa and, of course, for supplying the South African market. That's a huge opportunity. So that's an example of how, J&J saw South Africa as a springboard into the rest of the continent. So we're looking to replicate similar models across the sectors. So, US investors, US partners are quite welcome. So we are advocating as well for any potential US partners, Americans and Africans in the diaspora in the US, to be mindful that the Africa Growth Opportunity Act is such a central pillar to the future and the current state of US-South Africa and Africa-US relations.
Mr. Vatula is Chief Executive Officer of the Biggin Group. Biggin is an African infrastructure development group of companies based in South Africa and Mauritius with regional offices across Africa. As a driver of socio-economic development impact through innovative, solutions-focused infrastructure, Biggin provides a broad spectrum of socio-economic, financial, technical, environmental, and institutional services across multiple sectors.
I think infrastructure is a need everywhere. Because there's population growth, you need to expand the roads, you need more dams to accommodate, the population growth. You need harbors to be able to, get goods to export. And I think when you talk about economic growth in Africa, you cannot grow the economy of the continent if you don't have proper and adequate infrastructure. There's the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. Now, for that to work, it will never be successful in the absence of infrastructure, because goods have to move from Cape Town to Cairo. But what they've realized is that economic stability is important, political stability is important, and you're beginning to see that policy certainty is critical for business. But for me, what is important, investing in a country where there's policy predictability. Hence, in fact, you see, especially our president, getting involved in a lot of what is happening in the continent, because we understand that South Africa, if we succeed, then our neighbors will succeed, and it makes a successful continent. But key to that is having a bankable project, if I can call it like that. So as an institution, we don't get involved in construction, but we get involved in the funding of the project. In many instances, you will find that investors are looking for bankable projects. So as Bigen, we play that role. Because once it's a bankable project, you'll get lots and lots of people wanting to finance it. So we as an organization will do the feasibility, the pre-feasibility, the scoping of that project and get it to bankability. Now, we're promoters, let me put it that way, of different thinking, different ideas, and also ensuring that we bring in efficiency in what we do. We have our payoff line, which says, doing good while doing business. So everything that we do must have an impact in terms of the communities that we operate in. Most countries in the world are looking at Africa. And I think what is important as well is that we need to say to them that we're not looking necessarily for a handout, but we want to do business.
Rashid Tufi is Deputy Director General at the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. He believes that business events are the lifeblood for Cape Town and the Western Cape. It also provides people with the opportunity to visit, live, work, and invest in the region. Rashid is a member of the United Nations Global Impact Advisory Board for South Africa. He has a degree in economics and environmental science, as well as an MBA from the University of Cape Town.
The economic spin-off is phenomenal. In any one year, the direct and indirect jobs created by events in the center is close to 7,000 jobs. It fills the hotel rooms across the seasons. It's quite a famous destination now for global conferences, anywhere between 2 all the way up to 10,000 delegates. And they love this destination because it's got a combination of a spectacular city and it's reasonably accessible. I joke about it. It's equally far from everywhere in the world. But we also host several energy conferences because there's been a huge transition away from oil and coal towards clean energy. And the process that's really in top of people's mind is this just energy transition. And this part of the world actually leads in terms of solar and wind energy. And it's a huge opportunity for investment. The important thing about that is when international companies invest in solar energy, part of the government regulations is that a percentage of that goes into community development within the community where you locate your solar plant. One of the important things about landing an investment is making it easier for businesses to operate. And one of the things we've developed is a red tape reduction unit. And we are actually able to, on demand, look at things that are stopping or inhibiting an investment and actually go down there, talk to our fellow government officials, talk to a city municipal government and say, why is this process that could have taken 2 months? Why is it taking 6 months? And we've had real success. So the digital economy is a key catalytic sector for future investment. And that comes from the fact that we're perfectly located and we've become a hub for front and back office services within the IT sectors. Because we're on the right time zone for Europe, and it's really a competitive sector, and particularly post-COVID, it's been a great absorber of young people who may have been out of work due to restrictions in travel, but are now able to get a job in some of these growing sectors of the economy. But it also has certain special economic zones that drive investment. One of them, just 2 hours drive out of Cape Town, is the only customs-free zone in South Africa. And it's a port where people are able to invest in that port, land a manufacturing plant, and actually produce products for export without it entering the South African customs region. And that's called the Saldanha Bay Special Economic Zone. And it's one of the most powerful tools for investors to land in and to be able to extract their products while still contributing to our economy and creating jobs. And I'm an eternal optimist, but I think if you ever came to South Africa and you meet any person in South Africa, there's a belief that we're a country that wants to do better.
David Alexander, Senior Vice President of New Markets at Downtown Music Holdings. He is the founder and managing director of Sheer Music Publishing, the largest independent music publishing company on the African continent. As a serial entrepreneur, David has started or invested in many companies in the music industry over the last 30 years. And while the business of the music industry has been disrupted by technology, David has managed to align himself with the fourth industrial revolution and keep his business interests relevant in the marketplace.
The ethos of Downtown is empowering the creators to own their copyright, to own their master recordings, to own their intellectual property, but using our tools, our services, our people to make sure that they're taking advantage of the best opportunity for them, collecting their money from across the globe. So internally within the continent itself, South Africa and Nigeria really are the big hubs that make up the music industry. The South African industry, as I mentioned, pretty mature and robust, but there have been very few artists over time who've transitioned and been successful outside of South Africa. Somebody like Johnny Clegg comes to mind. Kind of the spice that African production brings to global pop. And global pop stars are interested in the stories that African musicians are able to tell through their music. So there have been a number of collaborations, and through that there have been some really great successes. So people like Wizkid and Davido and Burna Boy, who've really transitioned out of Nigeria almost into being American and European superstars. South Africa had its own success with a song called Jerusalema 2 years ago, and that put Zulu language music onto the Billboard charts for the first time since Johnny Clegg. And that's really great. But I think the idea of what we're trying to do is trying to develop an industry that supports and sustains this export plan. That it's not just the few individuals who are going to make up a high percentage of that volume. But actually, I think there still is a bit of inequality in terms of what is invested in a global hit versus what is invested in an African hit. And that's determined really by the size of your local market. So if you invest to only make money back from your local market, be it South Africa or be it Senegal, your opportunity for return on investment is limited. There's been huge interest from China and from India. They've come in and are offering services like Tencent Music and Boomplay, which are cheaper than Spotify and Apple Music, trying to take advantage of the opportunity of scale, the size of market, and bring on as many customers as possible. And I do think that that's something that really the global DSPs like Spotify and Apple Music haven't got right, is their local pricing. I think they price themselves out of the market. So the opportunity to invest has been on the intellectual property side, has been on the aggregation side. I think each part of the value chain really has an opportunity for different investors. So whether you want to take a stake and build a studio here, or whether you want to get involved in individual musicians and their careers, or then in how those tools and services get made available. I think South Africa is a huge opportunity for investment. The history that respects the music copyright, that has been inculcated into both the creators and the users. And there is a mutually beneficial relationship between those who create and those who consume or use. And therefore there is an industry that supports the creative industry here. The scale, I mean, the new young people on this continent that are going to be the future consumers, they're all interested in their own domestic music. They love the music from their country. They love the music from the surrounding countries. They want to consume that music and they will support it, and they will support it with money if it's sold to them at the right price point.
According to the 2021 Afra-Asia Bank South Africa Wealth Report, the global art market has an approximate value of $80 billion. Of this, Africa's portion accounts for $1.2 billion. The South African piece of the pie is worth $385 million. Art prices in the country have risen by 30% in the past decade. Global prices rose by 12% within the same timeframe. Makati Molabatsi is owner of MAC DCT Art Advisory and Agency and Senior Art Specialist at Aspire Art Auction, based in Johannesburg. She provides a service guiding private individuals, companies, and early career artists in navigating and investing in the contemporary African art world.
You know, insurance companies will recommend me to come and evaluate for insurance purposes. For instance, I evaluated artworks for the Nelson Mandela Foundation in their new hotel. They've got artworks, and sometimes people they want to sell their artworks. If they want to sell their artworks, I do a whole analysis of the artist and the artwork. South Africa has always had auctions, which focused on white artists. They are the ones that increased in value. Black artists or African artists, very few galleries gave them exhibitions. And of course, then their awareness did not increase. But with the modernists, we've got fabulous modernists in South Africa who operated, in the 50s and 60s, the legacy of those artists, especially our Black dead artists. Now we are trying to do something behind that. I mean, behind me is a Sekoto. That is one of our most valuable modernists. The more exhibitions, museum exhibitions, are staged about these artists, the more awareness there is, and then there is demand, and the value will increase. I choose to, or I prefer to sit with a collector, and have a conversation, because people have different motivations for acquiring art. I can't remember who said it, like the 3 motivations in acquiring art. It is the essential, social, and investment. So I always want to establish, why do you want to acquire art? I will go through, okay, so who are you? What do you like? What are your interests? And once I've established that, then I will go back, look for all the artists that fit what resonates with you, and then present it to you. I don't just present artworks, I present the entire artist. And then I will come back with the pieces that are available of that artist out there. So now there's more of our Black students going and becoming curators. More galleries are coming in, Black-owned galleries. And that encourages a lot of people to actually become artists. So the pie is becoming bigger. You know, there's more interest. In fact, there's a lot of interest from the US on not only South African artists, but African artists. You know, the rest of the continent, the Dakar Biennale, the Kampala Biennale, AfriArt, Black Rock, which is a residency in Senegal, you know, started by Kehinde Wiley, you know, who painted the portrait of the President Obama, a resident that's been around for a long time in South Africa, which is the Back Factory Artist Studios. It's been around for 30 years. It attracts a lot of artists from around the continent.
Professor Johnny Pieter, head of the Division of Allergology and Clinical Immunology at Groote Schuur Hospital and the University of Cape Town, which provides tertiary facilities to a population of 3.74 million people. His division provides clinical services focused on atopic, example asthma, angioedema and urticaria, food and drug allergies, and immunodeficiency diseases. Pieter leads groundbreaking studies in allergies and immunology at the UCT Groote Schuur Hospital's Lung Institute.
South African research community in science and health has had a legacy of being at the forefront internationally in many fields. Sadly, that's been driven by our disease burden, particularly HIV and TB. And if you look across South Africa, the sort of leading health science researchers are in fact nested within HIV and TB. And I think that what that's done is that has definitely created nodes of very, very top internationally renowned scientists. And if you look at big international collaborative efforts to study the genetics of, let's say, COVID, unfortunately, there still remains a real deficiency in the contribution of African populations to this effort. And we know that the African populations are genetically the most ancient, right? And so particularly this is relevant to the immune systems because our immune systems didn't develop in isolations. Our immune systems have developed with a constant pressure of infectious diseases for millennia. So the history of our genetics, and particularly immune genetics, are completely linked to the history of humankind in terms of infectious diseases. And that, like we talk about Africa being the cradle of humankind, and indeed from a genetic perspective, that is actually true. So we have the most diversity in particular regions of the genomes, many of which are directly related to the immune system. I think where we are struggling somewhat, getting the necessary support at all the levels of academic and scientific development. So if you look that, a person's career has got to go from a PhD to then a postdoctoral fellowship to then an early career researcher. And at that stage, they need to attract their own funding. And it's at that stage that unfortunately we're losing many people because government funding, university funding, that is all contracting and it's got other agendas. Our university is doing its best now to simply get, people from lower socioeconomic groups that have academic potential, get them university tertiary educations. That's a major challenge that a lot of our universities are facing. I think one of the other areas where we particularly need investment in science is that if you look internationally, a lot of universities are attracting, or through their legacy of real funding, they have been able to build what we call core facilities for the scientific research enterprise. In order to study, for instance, a human genome, you need to have the ability to do the sequencing. So that's the kind of wet laboratory aspect of it. You need to collect the sample from the patient, take out the DNA and put it through and actually get the code. Once you've got the code, you then need really someplace to store the data. And we're talking about 1 terabyte of data for each genome, right? So large volumes of data. And then you need usually high performance computing systems. And then you need appropriate softwares and access and what we call bioinformatics support to manage this data and to make even sense of it. Now, a lot of universities, in the US and Europe, what they've done is they say that these kinds of things, like studying genomics, is valuable across health disciplines, right? So I might be interested in it from immunology, but my colleague in cardiology is interested in it for cardiac diseases. And so there's a shared need for those resources. And yet, when I put in a grant, I need to pay a whole lot of things with that money, and so does my colleague in cardiology. But what we need is some kind of core funding to support core university initiatives. So that's the kind of thing that I really think if we're going to move ourselves further and get even further into the kind of high quality international arena across disciplines, we need to be getting investment funding to support those core initiatives. For instance, bioinformatics is something that we're going to need more and more and more within the world and within science. And that's something that you can train, get the skills, and then you can actually do it remotely. And as internet capabilities and these things grow within that rest of Africa, so it will be actually easy for people trained within nodes within the continent to then tap into that shared mentorship and research.
A bomb had been put in my car. I was working in exile in Mozambique, helping to develop the new post-independence legal system there. I end up in hospital in London recovering, and I get a note. It says, "Don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you." And I think, avenge me? We're going to cut off the arm, blind in one eye. Is that the country we want? If we get freedom, if we get democracy, if we get the rule of law, that will be my vengeance. And that will be my soft vengeance. That theme of soft vengeance became the theme of my life. So getting the Constitution, voting as an equal for the first time, putting up a beautiful building on the site of the old Fort Prison for the Constitutional Court, writing judgments, upholding the principles of our wonderful Constitution. That was my soft vengeance. I met the man who organized the bomb in my car. He came to see me. I'm a judge now. I look at him. So this is the man who tried to kill me. He's looking at me, this man I tried to kill. We didn't know each other. But he was on that side, I was on this side. And he tells me he's going to the Truth Commission. Will I oppose his getting amnesty for putting the bomb in my car? And I said I wouldn't oppose. And I said, I can't shake your hand. Go to the Truth Commission. Maybe one day we'll meet. Who knows? And months pass, the end of the year, I'm at a party. The band is playing lovely dance music. And I hear a voice saying, Albie. I look around, Albie. It's Henry. Henry van der Westhuizen was his name. He's beaming. And he said, I went to the Truth Commission. I spoke to Bobby and Sue and Farouk. People who've been in exile with me. I told them everything. And you said that maybe one day. And I said, Henry, I've only got your face to tell me that what you're saying is the truth. I put out my hand and I shook his hand. He went away elated. I almost fainted. But I heard afterwards, he suddenly left the party, went home and he cried for 2 weeks. I don't know if it's true. I want to believe it's true. I'm not even following up in case it's not true. Because for me, that would be more important than sending him to jail, which would do nothing for my arm for the country. That would be simple vengeance. Whereas he had the strength and the courage to go to the Truth Commission, acknowledge what he'd done. Now, I tell this story, in a sense, it's me with him. It was so important for thousands of people. And the power of the Truth Commission wasn't in the report and even the recommendations. It was the nation hearing what had happened. There's no space for denial in South Africa. So for me, it was healing. For the country, it was healing. We've created the foundations for reconciliation. And we've made huge progress in all sorts of sectors. You see it at the universities. You see it in our sporting teams. The idea of unity and diversity, of that nation, South Africa, very, very rich in pain, but also rich in hope and aspiration, with something very, very special, a marvelous country to live in, a wonderful country to feel I'm a national of South Africa.